Welcome to the Simple Doesn't Mean Easy podcast. We are here every Monday and Wednesday working at simplifying things in our lives, one day at a time, one simple step at a time. I'm your host, Michelle Visser, and today's episode, I just sat at the feet and soaked in all of this fantastic information. I really know you're going to love it. I'm talking with the founder of Herbal Medics Academy. And before I go any further, I need to tell you to go check this out. herbalmedics.academy.com. Guys, if you thought you had seen other programs out there that teach you how to use herbs, how to make some herbal teas, and how to make some tinctures, well, I got news for you. Herbal Medics Academy is not that. It is so much more. I think you'll realize as you listen to this episode how much more that it is. But basically, I mean, we've been talking for years here on the show about very simple ways that we can slowly work at breaking away from a broken food system. Well, we've also talked some about how the pharmaceutical system is also broken. And while there is absolutely a place for Western medicine, while there is absolutely a time that traditional pharmaceuticals are not only good, but welcomed and needed, a lot of the time, like a huge percentage of the time, we can literally be pulling away from the broken system. We can be educating ourselves and learning about nature, learning about plants and the medicine that they house within them. While on one hand, there is so much to learn. In a lifetime, we can never learn it all. On the other hand, with resources like Herbal Medics Academy, we can seriously become experts at herbal medicine. And guys, it is way beyond mixing up a tea blend or making a tincture. So if this is something you think that you might be called to know more about, if it's something that you feel a little pull on your heart right now that there could come a time in the future where I don't have access to the medicines or where I don't have access to a doctor. And there could come a time in the future that I really need to be able to turn to resources that are available at my disposal and know what to do with them. If that is something that sounds interesting to you, then not only do you want to listen to this episode, but you absolutely want to go check out Herbal Medics Academy. So let me tell you about our guest. Sam Coffman has worked extensively with herbs since 1987 and also has a very busy clinical herbal practice that he's been doing for over 15 years. He is an Army veteran who has served as Special Forces Medic Green Beret 18D. He's a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild, but he's also a wilderness EMT and a wilderness first responder instructor. He is a licensed acupuncturist with a master's in acupuncture and oriental medicine, but he holds a BA in linguistics and a black belt in jitsu. He's also the AI director at Herbal Medics Academy, where he combines his deep experience in medicine and technology to create innovative AI driven educational tools. He is also the best selling author of Herbal Medic and Survival Gardening. And working on an upcoming post apocalyptic fictional series called Collapse Horizon. Needless to say, he is a fascinating guy, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't get much sleep. But you want to listen to this episode all the way to the end. Sam tells us so many things, from recounting his story that actually was his passage into truly believing in the effectiveness of herbal medicine. It's a story that involves a broken thumb and removing a cast and using two herbs to heal his thumb. It's fascinating. And the whole story, well, you won't believe it till you hear it. And he also gets into the idea of the Western world and our thoughts of medicine and how they're shaped by pharmaceutical medicine versus plant medicine, and how a plant can be made up of thousands of constituents and what that really means. And he also gives us his thoughts on plant medicine, if it's as anecdotal as folks want you to believe, or if it's truly based on empirical evidence. And I think the way he breaks this down and explains it to you might be a surprise to you. It's definitely going to be fascinating for you. So let's bring Sam on. But first, guys, I need to tell you about maybe the best mail day ever. A large box truck arrived this morning, backed up my long drive, and delivered maybe my most exciting purchase to date. They delivered a blue Alpine freeze dryer. And I can't tell you how excited I am to start using this because a freeze dryer is going to retain the most medicinal and nutritional values of your food and your herbs over any other preservation method available. But it's a big purchase. So, how did I choose Blue Alpine? I'm going to tell you the 4 reasons I chose them. First of all, they are a US company. They're based out of Idaho. Second of all, their machines require less freeze drying time than any of their competitors. So they're going to save me time. And even more importantly, they're going to save me money. And they're a small family business. You guys know how important that is to me. This is a business where the family is directly invested and they want to see your success. And that leads to the fourth reason. Because of that, they have amazing customer service that will walk you through whatever you might have difficulty with. They will hold your hand and they will make sure you know what you're doing with this investment that you have made. So go to bluealpinefreezedryers.com and see what I'm talking about. Look at the quality and find out for yourself. If it's an investment you are ready to make, be sure to use code solely rested for a sweet discount. bluealpinefreezedryers.com. Well, Sam, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. I know I was just joking about you that I knew you wouldn't be late because, I mean, with your background in the military, I knew you would be in here before I was, and sure enough, you were. But I got to tell you, I mean, I've interviewed hundreds of people. I love talking. But when I saw your background and I realized, I mean, my goodness, you're a Green Beret. And I'm a little nervous talking to you, Sam, because wow, I've never talked to a Green Beret before, but welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here. Yes.
And I'm so excited that you are. Of course, I've also never talked to anybody who's actually a wilderness EMT and a wilderness first responder instructor. I mean, so many cool things that you have done and are doing. But to think that you're combining that with the fact that you're a clinical herbalist, I mean, I'm fascinated.
Yeah, it's a lot of, I mean, it's definitely a unique niche and one that I've
I don't think
created.
it is a niche, actually. I think you just made it up.
It's a one person niche. Yeah.
Yeah.
A one school niche. I mean, we have an
Mhm.
amazing faculty now,
Yes, and I
and
want to talk all about your school, definitely.
we have, yeah. So I guess my point is the whole thing is kind of blown into this huge school, and of course we have a store and an apothecary and a clinic and all that too. But yeah, originally the whole idea started for me well over 30 years ago. Um, I grew up in a very plant literate family. And we,
Yes, I was
you know,
gonna ask you about that. First of
oh
all, I
yeah,
love the way
normally,
that you refer to that as being plant literate. I love that because I'm a word person. So to be plant literate, I love it. And I noticed that in your forewords to both of your books, which by the way, let's mention those. Survival Gardening is your most recent one, and your first book, correct, is Herbal Medic.
correct. Yes.
Okay. And I know in your forward to both books, you mention your mom and dad. So they got
Yeah.
you started very early. So tell us about that.
Well, yeah, and they grew up, of course, gardening for food. My dad actually grew up in a big family on a wheat and a pea ranch, in northeastern Oregon, and
Oh, wheat
so
and pea.
yeah, wheat, pea.
Okay.
Those are mainly the crops there. Not anymore, but that was at the time. And
Mhm.
my mom, who lived in the small town next door, pretty much grew up with during the Depression era. Everybody had a victory garden. Everybody grew. And my grandpa on my
Yep.
mom's side was really fantastic. He was kind of a well-known gardener.
Hmm.
So yeah, I grew up with a family that we canned all of our garden stuff in the summer and the fall, and our trees, and we lived on an acre and had about a quarter acre garden, and it was full, like a big garden. And
Yeah.
so as kids, we were the forced labor as such, of course. We grew up working in the garden all the time from spring to fall. And but I enjoyed that. I always enjoyed that part of my childhood a lot. And she taught me that that the plants that she talked to always did better. And I remember as a
Mm,
4 or 5 year old, talking to plants. And
I
so
love
so
it.
my point is that that was already kind of embedded in me. So at the time that I started thinking about medicine seriously, herbal medicine was really my first thought in my head.
Mm,
And the second thought was, I had been in the military already, and then I got out, and I got an undergrad degree in linguistics actually, and then I was like,
mm,
man, I wanted to come back in, and I wanted to learn medicine, and the best possible way to do that for me, field medicine, the kind of the culmination of everything you need to know about medicine, not just in the field, every aspect of medicine. I always say the Green Beret Medic is like a cross between a trauma, like a combat paramedic on one side, and I would say like a nurse, like kind of a meatball. As much as you can pack
mhm,
into the amount of time they have, about kind of a meatball nurse practitioner. If you could mix those two worlds together,
mm.
because you had to be able to do prolonged field care. They're calling it prolonged field care now, but it was really austere medicine back then, is what the term
Okay.
was. And that was based on an old model, the model around the Vietnam War and so forth. Not to get into those details, but that was for me the perfect kind of mix of places to be able to start to work with plant medicine, because right away
Mm,
you're talking about sustainability of medicine. Even if you're purely allopathic, purely pharmaceutical, you have limits to what you can treat, right? You have limits to what's available to you, what can be dropped in, and can you even get it? And whether you're in a war zone, a post-disaster zone, or just in a very remote or rural area, what can you actually get? And then you have something that happens that eats up a bunch of you have somebody with 10% third degree burns on their body, they're going to eat up
mm,
all your resources in a couple of days. So
mm,
there's all these things that you had to really think about anyway, from even the allopathic, the military medicine side, that fit
mhm,
perfectly into herbalism for me. Now, that was all
mm,
secretive. I mean, I did that. The herb part was me. And even before I came into to become an 18 Delta Special Forces medic and came back into the military the second time. Even before that, I already had I actually did a little, like back then there was no internet, so it was like a little home naturopathic, and this was the old school nature, not licensed, not real naturopaths, but like the old school naturopathic course. I would never put that on my resume or anything like that, but I learned some. I probably learned a materia medica of 25 or 30 herbs out of that, and I
mm.
started to really be thinking about that. Right, so my head was
Okay.
already in that space by the time I was doing like heavy duty trauma and all the stuff that I had to do there. So by
Okay.
the time
Now
I was
something
able,
else. I'm sorry, but you mentioned you were 18 Delta. I didn't even know the D stood for Delta. That's how little I know about military jargon. But
well, the
when I
18
s
series is your special forces team, right? So your
okay.
Alpha
So when
is
I
your
s
your officer, and then your Bravo is your weapons, your Charlie is your engineer,
okay.
Delta is your medic, and then the Echo is the commo.
Oh,
So there's basically
okay.
5 roles, leadership, 2 different types of leadership roles, both officer and your team lead, team sergeant, and then all the way down through those 4 specialties: commo,
Okay.
weapons, medicine, and whatever left out, engineering. So
Okay.
so my
So
point
I
is, yes,
actually Googled, I had to Google what's 18D because I was reading your bio and I'm like, well, I want to understand what this means. Like, I understand
right.
Green Beret, but what's 18D? So I'm just going to tell you what Google says about what you know, Sam. And I think this is fascinating. An 18D is a special forces medical sergeant, highly trained in trauma medicine, possesses a working knowledge of dentistry, veterinary care, public sanitation, water quality, and optometry. Their role involves providing emergency, routine, and long term medical care for their team, the allied forces, and the host nation personnel in various operations, including unconventional warfare. Okay, so wow. So when I read that, I realized wait a minute, in some ways, and I think you're getting to this, there is actually a connection that people don't see between those two worlds of yours because as a medic, you had to be so well rounded, almost like a holistic doctor in a totally different kind of way. So the
Yeah.
more I thought about it, it kind of does make sense. Now,
Yeah, the
you
18
talk
Delta is sort of the consummate generalist in medicine,
okay.
that really the general. So I think, if you go back to like the early, let's say the early 20th century, when docs were kind of visiting docs, and going
Yep.
around, and one day they might have to help birth a calf, and the next day they might have to
Yep.
a broken bone in a tractor, accident. And the next day they might have to deal with a whooping cough epidemic. And so there's that kind of idea of the generalist, which I always was attracted to know a little bit.
Yeah.
And so, like, side note, fun fact, I got into med school when I was 42. I sort of at the time that I had finished, was sort of on the far end of raising a family. So I got out of the military the second time, out of special forces, and I had to raise family. I had to decide between really military or a military life or raising family, and I chose to be a father and a husband. And
I
so
love that.
after, at the kind of the tail end of that, I was like, I can't. I taught myself database programming. This was back in the mid to late 90s. Y2K was on its way around the corner. So it
Mhm.
was a good time. It was a big boom, right? To be able to do that. And I did really well. And I was able to raise a family that way. And then by the tail end, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I got to get back to medicine. So I went back to school and I got all my pre-med stuff and MCAT and all that stuff back then, got into several med schools. And so, long story short, I had to choose again, kind of between family, in particular my daughter's life, and she's an equestrian to this. That's to her this day. She
Mm.
started at 6, and it's an expensive thing, and a
Yeah.
financial kind of issues that happen. So I had to choose between med school or family. So I walked away from med
Mm.
school. But my point to that is that when I was going through med school interviews, right, I remember one of my interviewers, which they're all doctors, all MDs or DOs, saying, you can be pretty good at a lot of things, or you can be really good at one thing. What do you want? And I was like,
Mm.
I can be pretty good at a lot of things because that's what the 18 Delta was kind of like that. It was kind of like
Yeah.
being pretty good at a lot of things, but you had to be familiar enough to deal with them in the field because there's no specialist to go to yet. You might be later, but you need to at least know, can I put this to a specialist? So with that context then around herbalism, around working with plant medicine, it's absolutely a perfect marriage of those two.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
beyond that, not just in the field and in a rural environment or post disaster or whatever, which is what we kind of turned into as a school, and we have an outreach organization, and like you said, water purification, all that stuff. Beyond that, I became much better at just being a straight up clinical herbalist. And I think
Mm.
the reason is because I had to take care of the basics first, and I had to know the nuts and bolts of everything. And I'm kind of like that. I want to know,
Mhm.
even just like if when I turn the lights on, it doesn't just magically appear. That electricity has to come from somewhere. When you turn on the faucet, it comes from where. When you flush the toilet, that water goes somewhere. All of these things are part of sanitation. They're part of health. They're part of having a first world or environment, or all the way down to being,
Yeah.
having tarps for your roof and straw to cover the mud with.
Yeah.
That is the spectrum that I want to be able to operate in comfortably. And so it all helps. It all comes together and integrates and makes you better at everything you do, in my opinion. So that's kind
Yeah.
of where I started, right? That's the
Okay.
long story, I guess, of where I started.
Now, you gave another story too in one of your books. I'm forgetting which one. You mentioned in the beginning about your broken thumb. I thought that was
Mhm.
fascinating and how that kind of got you more committed to herbalism, right? Tell us about
Yeah, that
that.
was sort of my trial by fire, I would say, or the what's the term? Sort of the
Yeah.
ritualistic entrance into herbalism. Because for me, I always have to kind of like be you know, I'm from Missouri, show me kind of person. You got to show me that it works.
Right.
And not intentionally, obviously, but I did. I broke my thumb literally a few days before the start of the hardest part of the 18 Delta medical. Back then, there were three phases. The first phase was your medical, and that phase was broken into two halves. Well, technically three if you count your internship. And so that final part, it's about almost 5 months long, is called Goat Lab, or used to be called Goat Lab. And you're not allowed to use the word goat; they're your patients, but it's horrifying, and it's also the best training that I've ever had in my life. It's both.
Mm-hmm.
It's so
Mm-hmm.
and so it's at any rate, you gotta have full use of both your hands and your
Yeah.
head, and you're sleep deprived and you're put under wartime type of environment all the time. It's all scenario based, basically. So anyway, I break my thumb. It's an avulsion fracture of my left thumb, and we had our own X-ray. We had our own lab. We do everything, right? You do microscopy. You're the quote unquote doctor, meatball doctor. You do meatball surgery. We do amputations. You do debridements and so forth too.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I break my thumb. in a mountain biking accident because we had like about 5 days before the class started, and I had a buddy already there. He goes, let's go mountain biking. I'm from Colorado, used to everything being rocks, land on the sand, and boom, over the top of my bike, and I heard it pop, and I was in denial. Anyway, I go back and
Mm.
I go to Goat Lab, and we'd already have been in process, so I knew I had an X-ray. So I go in an X-ray of myself, and sure enough, I mean, you could just see. Even in my,
Huh.
limited radiology, experience and teaching, it was like you couldn't miss it. So I go to the hospital, and then the doc, the ortho doc there, I think he was a major. He's like, hey, you're going to need an open reduction internal fixation to fix this. There's no way you're going to fix it without it. You're not going to have full grip strength, and
And
you're
what
not
is
going to
that?
make
A
it.
surgery, right?
So they're going to pin it. They're going to basically, pin
Okay.
that, because what's happened is the actual connective tissue has pulled a piece of the bone away from that base of that bone. And so
Okay.
they got to pin it because there's nothing to hold the two together until
Okay.
it heals. So I talked him into giving me a cat. It was a long road, but I was like, I can't. He's like, I'll sign off on your medical recycle. So back then you were allowed a recycle, one recycle in the what was called the 300F1 of the first half, and one recycle during Goat Lab. And I was like, I hadn't seen my son in like a year, over a year, and I felt like just a piece of crap of a father. And I was
You
like, I'm
sound
going
like
to
such a great dad, Sam. I mean, you said in your
well,
book you were going to miss his third birthday, right? Wasn't that the
yeah,
problem?
well, and
I mean,
I did. I mean, but basically, it's like I either make it through this course in one fell swoop, or
mhm.
I don't make it through it all. I'm not doing a
Yeah.
recycle and waiting
Let's
three
get it
more
done.
months.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it's for whatever reason that was in my head, and that's how I did it. And just to say that phase one, just so you get an idea, that started in 1990, December 1990. We started with 83 students, and we ended, of the people that went through their original, like me, that didn't recycle at all. There were 13 of us, 13 out of 83 that made it through without recycle, or got bumped
Wow.
into a different MOS, but completely, or just dropped
And here
completely
you
out of
are
it.
with your thumb. Oh my word. And
Here
you were
I am
one of
with my thumb
13.
broken, starting on the hardest part of the course, and I lucked, and so I remembered. So anyway, yeah, I'm sorry, this is turning into a long story, but I basically told the
No,
major,
it's fascinating.
put the cast on, please. And he cussed me out. He's like, "You're an idiot. You're going to flunk the course. I'm going to see you back here anyway, probably to get the ORIF. And I'm really tempted to give you an Article 15 for disobeying a direct order from an officer for doing that. If I see you back here,
Wow.
I might."
And what would have happened if you got an Article 15? I
Well,
don't know
it's
what that.
non-judicial punishment, but it's like, it's a
Okay.
really, really bad stain on your record and so forth. I mean, I
Okay.
was like the perfect soldier. I never had discipline.
Yep.
Anything I
Yep.
did disciplinary wise was nobody ever found out about it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So basically, he kicked me out and told me to get a cast on my way out. So I got it casted, and then I went back to the barracks and I cut the cast off, and we went down
Oh,
because I knew there was a new age store in town. I'd already seen it, and I knew they had a bunch
okay.
of herbs there, and I knew, like I said, I'd done that little naturopathy,
Yep.
distance, thing.
So you knew your
And so
25 or 30 herbs.
I knew my 25 or 30 herbs, and I knew horsetail and I knew comfrey, really, and I knew that
Okay.
they would help me. And so I got a pound of each of those in a big Ziploc bags, and I went back to the barracks and I stuffed them underneath the locker because I knew for sure they were going to think I was hiding pot. And so then I got, of course, had all kinds of medical. You have every thing in medicine you need in terms of just basic resources. So I've got 4x4 gauze, and I've got I've got everything. I've got all kinds
Yep.
of Ziploc, and so I make myself a bunch of poultices right out of the horsetail,
Mhm.
just half and half, mixing them together, make them ahead of time because you only get about, on a good night, maybe you'll get 5 or 6 nights. Like on a Sunday night, you might get 5 or 6 hours of sleep. Otherwise, you're at 4 hours of sleep
Mm,
every night. So I get
wow.
all this stuff made because I know I'm not going to do it in the morning. Getting up at 4 in the morning or whatever, and I just
And you
stuff
can
them into
keep
my
the
cargo.
poultice on while
And
you're
so, yeah,
doing
so
your
then I would
daily
just go
stuff?
to the bathroom and get it wet, with water. I'd try to use hot
Mhm.
water if I could, and I'd get it soaking wet, and then just to the point I could wring it out, and then put it on that thumb, and then I'd wrap it with my Ace wrap because we had tons of that. That's like 2 inch or 3 inch. I think it's like 2 inch Ace wrap. So it always looked like I had a big wet spot there, and people would like, what the hell, make fun of me and stuff. But it's like I kept it on, and I lucked out because they had to divide the class in half. Half gets trauma, half gets microscopy back then, right? So I lucked out and I got the microscopy, which meant I had about a 4 week reprieve, maybe even five. I can't remember. It's like 4 week reprieve before I was really going to have to use that hand. So I gave myself that. I did, a lot of my own exercises, but I did that, and then the stuff started. And of course, every single day you're doing at least one cricothyroidotomy on a goat, and that means kung fu
Mm,
grip, being able to pull it up. And of course, the goats are fully anesthetized, but you have to be able to grab that trachea with your non-cutting hand, and that's my left hand. That's my broken thumb, and that is a much deeper neck than a human, and pull that up and hit your
mm,
cricothyroid membrane and get your airway and so forth. And from the time that you realize you have no airway, and you have no airway, you literally will have no airway. Like, it's not just you're not pretending. Then you say, I'm going to crike. You got 90 seconds to get a patent airway. And you've
mm,
got 20 minutes to get through your primary survey, and that's 90 seconds as
mm.
part of your 20, so boom, 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 you got to get it done. And my thumb would ache, for like
Yeah.
hours afterwards, after doing the emergency, and you're doing it every day, and then you're getting tested on it, and you've got to pass the test if you want to pass the course. And so, anyway, I made it,
Hmm.
and so that's my little story. And to this day, I have like a little calcium deposit there. I've never had any arthritis in it. I have really strong grip strength. I have a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. You got to have a grip strength to do Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I've got really good grips, and I've just, hey,
Mhm.
that was my little ritual, or my little trial by fire with herbs, where I like
Yeah.
turned around and said, okay, I believe
You
with
said there
everything
is
that
definitely
I am,
something to
that
this.
this is better. This is real medicine. And
Yeah.
that was the problem, as I was brought up through military medicine, and I had to do everything kind of on the
Yeah.
sly for my own. And then it turned out to be team members, like, there's like, I started to treat team members and their kids like, hey man, whatever
Mm.
you're bringing. And I found I posted it on Facebook like about 6 months ago, going through storage. I found some of my old, very first herbal first aid kits. It was something that the supply sergeant threw out as an old fly tying kit that has these glass vials, and I had all these different herbs in there. I had some different oils. I had some different stuff in there that I would use in the field to keep my immune system up when everybody else was getting sick, to
Wow.
make sure I'm good. And and of course, I was always, not of course, but I was at the top of my class physically and mentally all the time, right? And people always, I was a
Mhm.
good medic, and so people were like, what do you
Give
do?
me
Do
some of
those
that.
herbs like make you smart? So they'd want
Yeah.
some. And it's like,
Yeah.
hey, I noticed you didn't get sick. Everybody else did. My kid just got a flu. Can I bring him in? And of course,
So
all
you were
that
the
was on.
herb dealer
Well, that,
is
yeah, and
what
it
it
was on
was.
the down low, like a drug dealer almost, because if the medical director had found out, I would have got my ass chewed, or I would have gotten seriously chewed out for that.
Now, why is that? Why would they have cared?
Because it was not accepted. And this was back, again, late 80s, early 90s, when you had to look over your shoulder all the time about herbs, and
Mm.
the FDA was all over it all the time. This was before the
Mm.
Deshay Act, when the big, corporate nutraceutical companies put a leash on the FDA in exchange for CGMP and getting rid of mom and pop shops to their benefit, of course, later. But that was kind of when things started to change a little bit. And now it's a whole different world, because it's just the supplement industry is so huge. And even in
Mhm.
a conservative state like Texas, where even in the beginning of the school, our clinics, because we did student clinics all the time, and we always had people coming to check us out, taking our paperwork, making calls like
Mm.
these. I'd get these fishy calls like, "Oh yeah, man," because I write an article about like rattlesnake bite, because I treated a rattlesnake bite in a dog, and it was a big thing, and it was amazing. I mean, I was able to just do
Mm.
incredibly how to turn it around. Yeah, my cousin just got rattlesnake bite, man. Can you help me out? And you could hear stuff going on in the background. That is somebody from the state, it's an Austin number that's trying to get you and pull you into something, and be able to charge you.
Ah,
Because I mean, back then they were
wow.
kicking licensed naturopaths out of Austin all the time, and out of Texas. So it
Wow.
was that kind of an environment, but even worse even in Colorado when I first started. Now and especially in New Mexico, is an amazing state, has so much medical freedom, and I love New Mexico.
Mm.
It may be the best place to practice as an clinical herbalist. And I'm a
Mm.
licensed acupuncturist now too. I have a master of
Yes.
science in acupuncture and herbal medicine. I went back to school and got that. And so, I am actually the closest you can get to being a licensed herbalist, I would say, that you can. Maybe a
Mm.
licensed naturopath might be comparable, but in this state, I would say, and in Colorado, which are Colorado's my home state, and I kind of consider all this my home. I would say I'm in the best place you could possibly be to practice herbalism.
That's cool. Um, so when you read back to the story about the thumb, I'm still thinking about this. You kept that poultice on pretty much 24/7, right? Daily
No, well,
to see the
I
impact.
started. This is where I started to learn about how much moisture is important in wound healing of all types. So if it became too macerated, if it became too wet, then I would let it dry. And
Okay.
just do it dry overnight or whatever. I had to put something on at night because if I turned and sleep, and I'd be so. I mean, you're so exhausted. Then I actually damaged it a little bit worse once because I turned to sleep and somehow caught it or something. And I remember waking up in severe pain. So it's like, okay, I got to keep something on it all the time to keep myself from doing that. But yeah, in general, I would say maybe not 24/7, but as close to that as I could get without it becoming too wet.
Okay. And this was like 4 to 6 weeks. I mean, it's not an
Yeah,
easy fix per se is what I'm
yeah,
trying to say. Not that surgery is an easy fix either, but for some reason in the Western world, we see surgery and pharmacy as an easy fix. When in reality, of course, it brings other problems. I mean, I have a daughter that had spinal fusion and it led to a neurological syndrome that nobody even told us about it on almost unheard of thing. Like so surgery is never an easy fix. And the medicine, there's so many side effects and you're only getting I've heard you talk about you're getting one component of a plant when you're taking, let's say, aspirin instead of all of the was it willow bark?
yeah. Well, so
Um,
our meadowsweet is really where it started with Bayer aspirin. They start with meadowsweet, but
okay,
yeah, so salicylic versus
okay,
acetyl salicylic acid. The acetyl group on there is what makes it aspirin, ASA. But
okay.
that difference is there. Yes, the point is very well taken. So pharmaceutical medicine, and I realized this when I my first day in practically my first week in med school, with the physiology class, whatever it was, I was like, oh, it dawned on me. I mean, I couldn't believe it took me this long to realize. It's like, I get it. We are only learning physiology as it pertains to pathways of drugs. This is pharmaceutical written
Mm,
curriculum, and it has been since the Deshay
wow.
Act of 1910. That's what's happened. So we have this entire smokescreen that was put over the language. This is a whole other topic, but the language of plants. What is the language of plants and how they interact with our body? Because it's not pharmaceutical medicine. It's not single compounds. It's not, and so there you even have like the physiology is different. And by that I mean, when this is what finally this really dawned on me when I got my master's of science in acupuncture and oriental medicine. So I finished that and then started studying for the board exams and all that stuff I needed to get my license. And that's when, and prior to that, I'd been using a lot of traditional Chinese medicine or TCM herbs, but I'd been using them in a Western way. And the reason for
Mm,
that was because it was very hard to find research on Western herbs. Maybe in Europe a little, but in America, it's a joke. It's an absolute
mhm,
joke. Versus in TCM or in India with Ayurvedic medicine, they say, hey, you know what? These plants have been working this way for thousands of years. We know they work. How do they work? And that's where the research starts. Instead of it being in America, a pharmaceutical company doing research that's paid for by the public, with through grants and so forth that they can make profit on, so forth.
yeah.
Right? If I sound I'm a little biased, obviously, but they already have it and set in their head like, unless we're going to make money on this and we know it, there is no
Absolutely.
indicative sign that this actually works.
Absolutely.
That's what you get. So anyway, I
And they
started
even make it
studying.
sound dangerous, right? You
Oh
Google
yeah,
some of these
right. So
plants and it's like,
herbs
"Don't
either
take
kill
this if."
you or they have no effect at all. It's like
Yeah,
so which is it then? Like, so if they kill you, that means
exactly.
that there's some sort of an effect, right? That
Yeah,
the toxicity based on dosage.
yeah.
And that's the
The
thing
logic isn't
with a
there.
plant, you can't just do dosage in the same way you can with a single compound, even close to it, because there's no standard for when you harvest a plant and so forth. There's a lot of good examples of this that can tell you, yeah, if you harvest a plant at such a time in their, in the cycle of its life, that it's going to be much higher in a certain specific constituent. But you have to remember,
Mm,
there's 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 constituents maybe in a plant, right?
mhm,
So what you find then is that there has to be a language to speak about as opposed to Western pharmaceutical language, there has to be a plant language, and there is, and it's TCM. There are others as well. Like I said, there's Ayurveda, there's
traditional
a lot.
Chinese
There's
medicine, right? TCM.
traditional Chinese medicine, or even better,
Okay.
classical Chinese medicine. TCM happened during the Chinese Revolution and was kind of like you better get it together here, or you're going to be executed next month type of thing. You can tell, like, just oh, pull this over here and pull this over here. But classical
Mhm.
Chinese medicine goes back even, I think, in more depth on a lot of those things, and it's a
Hmm.
different world in some ways. But yes, TCM. So for our perspective, TCM and the language certainly made it across that bridge into TCM. Ayurveda, lots and lots of indigenous cultures have their own language. I don't know anything about any of those. I just know about TCM. But what I'm saying is that there needs to be a language that actually incorporates. And of course, we have it in the West. The traditional Greek medicine made its reemergence here as well in the US, kind of a watered down version of it. But we have that idea, and even in the Middle East, there's a history of watching through, basically it's empirical evidence. It's watching and observationally seeing
Yeah.
over hundreds, thousands, millions of patients over literally centuries and millennia, being able to say, okay, we can say without a question that this particular plant does this, but if you use the leaf, it does that. But on this other one that grows up in the north, it's obviously the same plant, and we would say it's a different species. There's a little difference. And if you prepare it in Chinese medicine,
Mm.
if you prepare it with vinegar first, then it does this more. But if you prepare it with wine, then it does this. And so all of this incredible complexity and beauty. But whereas what I was doing when I first started working with TCM plants was probably 15 years ago, is I read an article about ashwagandha being used through what's called a nausea oil, NASYA, which is an Ayurvedic concept of infusing an oil with ashwagandha and then applying it to the inside of the nose as deep as you can so that it gets across that membrane and even across the blood-brain barrier, so some of the constituents clearly, because what it ends up doing, or this research showed that it was alleviating or reducing and slowing down, Alzheimer's and even
Wow.
dementia. And so I thought, wow, that's interesting. What other herbs are out there? And then there was speculation about why. And the speculation was, hey, we find that it's probably repairing the myelin sheath, not the nerve. If a nerve
Mm.
cell is dead, it's dead, but the myelin sheath that protects the nerve. That gets
Wow.
damaged by inflammation, gets damaged by stress, it gets damaged by trauma, all of those things that happen. And so I started messing with that, and I had some amazing clinical cases off of that, some really incredible case studies that were successful off of using it that way, right? Not just ashwagandha, several other, but they were all TCM plants. So now fast forward till I started going through the MSAOM and getting my master's. It was like, oh my gosh, I was using it again from this whole reductionist kind of way. And now there's a whole new language to describe what's going on at the basis of a lot of disease, chronic disease. So instead of playing whack a mole with endocrine and with perimenopausal and with autoimmune disorders, where you're just like, oh, well, here's the symptom, let's do this. And oh, well, the thyroid, let's throw this at. And
Mhm.
it's ridiculous because that language is designed around single compound, the concept of single compounds in pharmaceutical medicine, and they do it. I mean, those compounds do a far better job than an herb would at doing that particular thing because that's what they're designed to do and how they're made. And there's a lot of research that goes into getting that particular compound to that tissue. And that's a big secret in herbalism too: is how do you get the herb to the tissue? Are you going to
Mhm.
nebulize it? Are you going to take it orally? Are you going to sublingual? All the different ways you can do it, right?
Mhm.
So that came around too. It's like, okay, that's just not explaining what's really going on. Like we have somebody who's perimenopausal and they've got all of these they unexplained weight loss, and their cortisol levels are just all over the place, and their circadian rhythms or their cortisol throughout the day is all messed up, and they're taking tests that show all of that. And then eventually the thyroid, he was like, I'll jump in because they got blood sugar issues, and they've got so all the stuff that starts to happen. And instead of just throwing an herb over here for the thyroid and an herb over here for blood sugar, and then there's the functional medicine side, which thankfully is kind of a bridge across allopathy and I would say holistic
Mhm.
medicine, maybe herbalism, is saying, but then functional medicine, everything is the gut. And at the beginning anyway, everything was leaky gut, and everything was SIBO, and
Yeah.
everything was, or something related to the gut somehow, and the gut brain. I'm not saying that's incorrect, but it's not the full picture. So then, I started realizing, wow, okay, this whole language that describes things like kidney in deficiency, kidney on deficiency, spleen chi deficiency, liver chi stagnation, rising heat, all of this stuff. These are very kind of esoteric and flowery language, but it works. It actually works when you look at the herb, whether it's Western, it doesn't matter what the plant is. It matters
Mhm.
what that plant language, learning that language of the plant through
Mhm.
taste, really is a big part of it as well. The energetics of that herb, perhaps. I hate the word energetics because it's so misused, but that's kind of what the only word to use for it in Western, in English. And
Mhm.
then how that affects the energetics again of the body, and the either deficiencies or excesses or whatever is going on there. And so that kind of vitalism, that Western herbal vitalism, it's sort of a thread of it did stick through the age of darkness. I think that the Flexner report brought into the world for the U.S. And it's sort of, there's a thread of it, that's kind of come back around and revived and renaissance, along with the thread of or kind of this revival or this birth of medical herbalism, which is sort of like herbalism saying, oh, we'll bow down to you, pharmaceutical medicine, and we'll put everything in constituent theory, and that'll solve the problem, because then we'll be speaking the same language. And I've done that too, because you got
Mhm.
to speak the same language. Because if you're an herbalist, you're really a translator to
Mm.
allopathy, and you have to be
Hmm.
able to explain to a doctor. You can't tell a doctor, well, I think she's got too much heat that's rising. They're going to say, well, you're like an idiot. But if you can explain in terms that show that you have that medical intelligence from an allopathic side, then now you've got audience. And
Mhm.
if it works, assuming that you have a doctor, and I've worked with dozens, if not hundreds of doctors over the years, obviously. But assuming that you have a doctor that's not caught under their own ego and is able to and is there because they
Yeah.
want to help people, and 9 times out of 10 that's the case, they'll be like, I don't know what you're doing, but it's working. So let's
Yeah.
keep doing it together. And that's the best thing that can happen in the world. I love that feeling when
Mm.
you have, especially when, like, I mean, I've worked with C. diff like a week before surgery because there's no other option. Everything else is run out. I've worked with so many different things that way with
Mm.
doctors where it's been very successful. And they're like, whatever you're doing is working. Let's keep
Mm.
doing that. And then let's go ahead and work on this, and let's get back in touch, stay in touch about what the medications are we're doing, what your theories are, what my theories are, and let's put them together. And that is really where I think medicine, needs to be in the
Yeah.
West. But for me, as an herbalist, my own little thing is I can't explain to him what kidney yin deficiency is, but that's clearly or blood deficiency or whatever.
Mm.
Even though sometimes you'll find, a mirror, you'll find a lot of people that are blood deficient or anemic or in some way or another. There's different types of anemia, yes, and we classify reduction and with reductionism kind of differently, of course, based on what the cellular components are that are there. But the concept of blood deficiency in Chinese medicine is a deficiency that is absolutely treatable by herbs in ways that just blow my mind. And it's like, oh my
Mhm.
gosh, what did we just do here? And that dawned on me when I was an intern in school, getting my master's, because I was in. You have to be an intern before you're allowed to start sticking needles in people, obviously. And so you're an intern, I think, for 1 or 2 trimesters. I can't remember. It might have been 2. And I was an intern to one of my favorite doctors, and her name was Dr. Tan, and she was from mainland China. She'd worked like 40 years
Hmm.
as an acupuncturist and an herbalist, and she was
Hmm.
very mainstream Chinese, mainland China herbalist as
Hmm.
well. And unlike a lot of like the saying goes in America, acupuncture is 80% needles and 20% herbs. And in China, it's 80% herbs and 20% needles. And
Yeah.
she was good with needles, but she was very much more of an herb person, which I was very fortunate because a lot of instructors aren't. And
Hmm.
the whole system, that's a whole other conversation. Anyway, she gets this patient in who is like
But
a
this was a
perimenopause.
traditional setting that she was working in. It was a
Yeah, well, the
traditional.
school,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, so it's
Okay.
all needles and herbs basically, right? But it's Chinese herbs, and she's not sending them with patent medicine. She's not into it. She doesn't want to use those. She's pulling
Okay.
the herbs out of the way I would, right? But she's
Okay.
even the Chinese way, which is like, okay, you're going to put these herbs and you're going to cook them and blah blah blah. She's giving them instructions, and I'm like, man, I mean, what I do is I do all that for them, and they take home a liquid extract. And so it's a lot easier for them. They don't have to do all that stuff. And I
Yeah.
don't just do a tincture, I do multifractional extractions using all kinds of different solvents. And when I'm done, they've got really clinically potent herbs in their hand to be able to take them in liquid form. So we can do all kinds of things with them. We can sublingual, we can nebulize, we can do them as drops, we can do so many different things. Anyway, she's
I'd
telling this.
never even heard of using a nebulizer with herbs until I heard you mention that. I think
Oh yeah, yeah.
that's not something people
Nasal
typically think of.
atomization, nebulization, ocular, intraocular. There's
Wow.
so many ways to be able to enter, especially for things that are nerve related or upper respiratory tract related.
Wow.
So,
Guys, I have to pause for a second and tell you about something I don't really talk a lot about, but if you follow me on social media, you have probably met Bixby and Selah. They are the beloved four-paw furry members of our family. And when we first brought home Selah, we really thought long and hard about raw dog food because I know it's the most nutrient dense option for the dogs. But it was way too much hassle. I knew I could never do it and stick with it. So I was elated to find Sunday's dog food. Guys, go check this out. It is actual, raw, nutrient dense, real food that has been freeze dried. So it's totally convenient. It's just like feeding your dog kibble, but they're getting amazing raw food nutrients. Go to sundaysfordogs.com and use code solely rested, and you will save a whopping 50% off your first order. Your dog will love it. I'm not kidding. They absolutely love the taste. It is better than their treats to them. And you will love knowing that you are conveniently feeding your dog the best food you could be feeding them. Sundaysfordogs.com. Use code solely rested, SOULYRESTED. If you are looking for the best source for botanicals, herbs, adaptogens, and you want to really have a high quality organic option of things that you just can't grow yourself or you just don't have access to, but you want to use them for the medicinal and just really nutrient dense properties they offer. Let me tell you about my favorite source. Go to solelyrested.com/botanicals. There, I not only tell you about my favorite source, I also tell you about a sweet discount code that you can use whenever you're placing an order. And I link to all my favorite options. I even give you some recipes there for ways that I use these botanicals. Go to solely rested, SOULY rested.com/botanicals.
Yeah, so getting the herb to the tissue is this very, critical component. It's not just how you make the extraction. It's not just all
Yeah.
the different solvents you use or multifractional and heat and all the things you need to do, but also how do you actually deliver that? And that's one of those, kind of clinical pieces that you have to have in order to be able to be effective as a clinicalist, in my opinion, a clinician, in my opinion, as
Hmm.
opposed to just, yeah, take, 3 dropperfuls 3 times a day orally. Sometimes
Right.
that's okay. You need to get it to the gut. And sometimes it's okay because you got to get it, it'll be fine going across the gut wall and so forth, into the bloodstream. But often it's not. So back to Dr. Tan
Yeah.
in the clinic. She's sitting there, and so again, this perimenopausal, all these symptoms that I would see in my clinic, in my student clinic, all the time, and even working with our doctor, our functional medicine doctor, Dr. Kyla Helm, constantly. It's just again, it's kind of a whack-a-mole thing,
Mm.
and from the functional medicine perspective, maybe not so much because, of course, Dr. Helm is working with all of these, and even another nature or another NP that I used to work with. They're working from the gut out basically, and so the
Hmm.
herbs are kind of like this extra help to be able to help with other symptomology types of stuff, right? Anyway, Dr. Tan is just like um, saying, "Okay, yeah, yeah, yeah," and she takes her pulse and looks at her tongue, and then and then she's like, okay, blah blah blah, and we'll do this. And she's just like, easy. This is low hanging fruit to me
Mm.
later. And I'm like, what? This is low hanging
Mm.
fruit. I'm just like, yeah, sure. This woman comes in like, a month later, and she's like, okay, yeah, the night sweats have stopped completely, and blah blah blah, and I'm feeling
Mm.
better. And I've got more energy. And she's like, okay, now we do this. I'm just like, wait,
Mm.
what's going on here? Like, I would,
Wow.
she was just so effective. And so that was when I really opened my eyes, I think, to okay, there is clearly a pattern recognition, what we would call syndrome differentiation, TCM, that's going on here. That's the skill I need. I need to really be able to
Mm.
be a clinician and a diagnostician from this language, and then that translates to the plant language so easily. It's the same language. So
Mm.
that's where I first started really understanding that. I added that into my clinical practice then as soon as I could, like
Mm.
literally probably right away. Like I was already
Yeah.
doing it when I was in school there because I already had my own clinical practice, Western. And oh my gosh. And so then I started realizing I've done like a little podcast on this, like the different layers of healing. I think I've got it on my YouTube too. So like the 4 layers of healing, right? The
Okay.
superficial, and then what we would call the branch from a TCM perspective. They have a root and a branch, and then functional medicine, and then below that, the root, the TCM root. And so if I'm working with somebody who's got allergies, yeah, that's a very oversimplistic example, but yeah, I can absolutely help your allergies, and I can give you something that won't make you sleepy and it won't knock you out and it won't affect those things. But it's not really getting the problem. The core of the problem, of this allergic issues that you're having. we're going to do that through TCM, right? And then you can do them both, not mutually exclusive, and you end up with a far better final result or result as you go forward than otherwise.
Hmm. Hmm. So cool. Such a Okay, so I don't know at what stage of your story you started your Herbal Medics Academy, but the fact that people like me can actually learn what you're talking about right now and really learn that, that a tincture is not the same as a multifractional extraction and learn how to do a multifractional extraction, I think is fascinating. I looked at your site and I was kind of blown away. So tell us about that.
Sure. So that's Herbal Medics Academy, aka the Human Path, which was started 17 years ago. Technically, the first version, of version 1.0, started in 1992, however many years ago
Mm,
that was, and it was more of a part-time thing. And then the Human Path started after I walked away from med school. This 50-acre
mm,
property dropped in my lap, literally. And I was like,
hmm.
"Oh, it's finally time for me to pursue
Wow.
my dream that I've had for at that point
Wow.
over like 20 years." It's like I
How
can
does
really
land drop in your lap, Sam?
it was a former rock quarry, and there was a big legal dispute between two parties,
Huh.
and they needed somebody for a basically to pay the legal fees and to come forward and to have a plan. And the people that wanted
Wow.
to make sure that the land didn't turn into a development or suburbia, and
Wow.
I was there, and I was already
That's
working with
so cool. And this
permaculture.
was in New Mexico.
No, no, this was in Texas. This was in a
Oh,
different state
okay.
in Texas.
Okay.
North of town, used to be. Now it's engulfed by a town, but it was just north of Cibolo Creek, up 281 in Texas. And it was very hard
Okay.
to
And
get
that's
to.
where your
That's,
brick and mortar is still.
that's where it was, right? The
Okay.
brick and mortar. Now we're in Taos. We moved to Taos 3 years ago, and now it's our property here, which is gorgeous in the mountains, backs on
Okay.
national forest, and we have really nice place here that's part-time. Again, most of our classes, I would say 90 to 95% of our classes are either online completely or are accessible to be online if you prefer not to come out here. And then during the
Okay.
summer months in particular, we do a lot of like wilderness first aid, wilderness first responder. We've got a big hands-on medicine making weekend coming up this weekend. We've got the maiden mother crone stuff and the emergency birth stuff on. We got a lot of stuff that we do here during the summer months, but
Okay.
our
Okay. Now,
the
do you
lion's
have
share
some
was online.
full-time students like in person?
Oh, yeah, we have a lot. They are full time with us online, and then they come to get the pieces, the hand, because there's some that take
Okay.
prerequisites online. Like our 10-day home course is online on site, but it takes almost a year. For most students, it takes almost 2 years to complete all the prerequisites to just come to that
Mm.
course, which is
Oh,
taught by
wow.
myself and Steve Harrison, MD. He was also a former 18 Delta, and we put together this austere medicine
Hmm.
course that marries. He's a doctor now, of course, he has been for 40 years. So it marries the two worlds between what I teach and what he teaches in this incredible austere medicine experience that they get. And that's what home is. Herbal and off-grid medical experience is what that stands for.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but to get there, you got to take the prerequisites, or you're just going to waste it. It's a waste of time. You got to know something before you even step in that door and come and
Yeah.
study that particular on-site. Not every on-site's
Okay.
like that, of course. So
Okay.
there's a lot. So yes, we have full-time students all over the place, and we've had full-time clinical students for like 4, 5, 6 years, and we've got some that are stepping out in their own practice that are just amazing. We've got some that have come in and started
Mm.
teaching for us then, and they're just
Mm.
amazing teachers and amazing clinicians. But
So
it's because
cool.
they've gone through our whole program.
So cool, Sam. I mean, I can't believe I've talked to you this long and I didn't right up front, first of all, say thank you for your service to our country
Oh,
and I mean, it was a decade, I believe you were serving as a Green Beret as a medic, I believe.
6 years. 6 years as 18 Delta, but 4 years
Okay.
when I first got out of high school. I was in for 4 years I was a military intelligence. I was actually a
Oh,
linguist, a
wow.
German linguist on what used to be the East-West German border. Civilian, it was called Human
Wow.
Intelligence Collection. I was an interrogator, but it was called Human Intelligence Collection, which meant just
Wow.
talking to people really and gathering information.
Wow. Well, thank you for all of that, your service to our country. And then to add on to that, that you're teaching others to be able to be knowledgeable in all these areas. Huge thank you. There's nobody else out there exactly like you, I feel like. And I'm so thankful that you're sharing your knowledge the way that you are. It's incredible.
Thank you. Yeah, well, thank you for the kind words. And it's true. There are some people that are doing a lot on one thing. The COROM, College of Remote and Offshore Medicine, run by also a former SF
Oh, really?
guy and a former Green Beret, is an amazing school that's got incredible expeditionary courses and so forth. And
Hmm.
he's been bugging me. He's been waiting on me for a couple of years to come up with the course that he wants. He wants to be able to integrate the herbalism in his, and I would love to, but that's the only school that's even really near being able to do that the way that we've done what we do. Now, granted, we're not able to compete with somebody like him on that side of just strictly straight up allopathic austere medicine. We're not there, and we never will
Mhm.
be. That's not our bag. But we're and we're not in. We're way ahead, in my opinion, of any herb school in this country. And I know I'm probably piss some people off saying that, but I just feel we are because we just have so much. I have so much more clinical diverse experience. I'm not
Yeah.
just working with one type of patient, and I won't even get into that. But basically, I feel like we can
Mm.
give our students diversity, and we do. We have an outreach organization called Herbal Medics. We've gone to Nicaragua. We've gone to both coasts, and including working with the Rama Indians on the East Coast, where they're 100 miles from any road.
Mm.
We've gone to
Wow.
Mexico. We've gone to some of the most remote parts of the U.S., a lot of Native American nations as well, where there is almost no healthcare at all, or no healthcare within an hour, 2 hours, even 3 hours. They're in a food desert.
Mm.
We've worked with slow sand water
Mm.
filtration for tribes and for people that have no water filtration at all. That's what we developed. I mean, I started that program in our school because we were going to go to Nicaragua the first time. And I was like, parasites, parasites, parasites. And then we go down there to do a scouting trip the first year. And it's like there's literally flatworms swimming around in the little cistern that they've
Oh.
got. It's like,
Oh.
water purification first. And we'll do free herbal
Wow.
clinics too, but we're not just going to give you something for parasites, right? I mean, let's
Yeah.
take care of the parasites in the water first, and at
Wow.
the same time give you a clinic, herbal clinic. So we've done so
Wow.
many things like that, and because of that, we have a huge diversity of experience, not just in actually having a clinic, a free herbal clinic, but how do you set that up, and how do you transport maybe even hundreds of pounds of herbs across the country or to a different country? How do you actually plan for the epidemiology? How do you do the reconnaissance? What I call epidemiological reconnaissance. What are you going to get? Because you can't take your whole apothecary with you. What are you going to probably most likely get? And you're always going to get it somewhat wrong. So you have to be able to, on the fly,
Yeah.
switch. You have to know your herbs well enough to be able to switch
Mm.
and know, yeah, we're out of that one now because there's been so much of this, but we can work that. So there's so many things that'll pop up as surprises. And special forces medicine trained me for that. Basically, special forces medicine was all about being adaptable, flexible. If I could tell you the saying they told me, you wouldn't be able to air it, but because it's an adult, it's not safe for work. But the way that they would say it to us, and it was basically that you have to be flexible because you never know. And they would do that to us all the time. They get, hey,
Yeah.
Sergeant Kaufman, come here. Uh, got a half an hour to prepare. I want you to give a class on tularemia and the effects and blah blah blah. I'll be like, what? Tularemia? I've read it. You got a half an hour, give me a class. And so they would do that to you all the time, right? And so
Mm.
you really had to, and I learned so much from that. And because of that, I became an amazing, it just helped me as a teacher so much to be able to talk about anything. And before I started teaching full time at my school, 17 years ago, I told myself, I'm not going to be the kind of teacher that has to look at notes. I don't like doing that.
Mm.
I would go through my stuff and I would pretend like I was taking my own class, and I would say, if I was a distant, a jerk, I don't know what I can say here, but in terms of language. So if I was, really a bad, like somebody who's just trying to, what I call a sniper, trying to pick me off on something, and you
Okay.
get those.
Yep.
What would I pick me off on? And I would make
Mm.
sure I had that stuff down. And just starting at that long ago and doing
Mm.
that for so many years, it's like, please try to stump me, not because of ego, but because if you can stump me, it means I don't know something and I want to know.
Mm.
I want to
Yeah.
know, and I want you
That's
to
great.
know, and I want us both to know. The word, and I say it often. I don't know. I don't know the answer. That's a great question, and I don't know. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to find out, and I'd like to come back to you, and I'd like you to find out, and let's talk about this more. I mean, I do that a lot. Not a lot, but it happens. I think you have
Yeah.
to be able to say, as a teacher, there are many times where you're going to have to, in your career of teaching, say, I don't know the answer to that, or I'm still trying to figure the answer out on that myself. That's an amazing question. And I asked myself that a couple months ago, and I'm still working on it. And here's
Mm.
what I found out so far. That happens a
Mm.
lot too.
Mm. Well, tell everybody where they can find you personally and how they can learn more about your school.
Absolutely. So our school is Herbal Medics Academy, not Herbal Academy. That's a whole different thing. Herbal
Mhm.
Medics Academy. So it's herbalmedics.academy. It's
Okay.
also called sometimes the Human Path. So we're at thehumanpath.net. Um,
Okay.
we also have an organization called Herbal Medics that is herbalmedics.org. Any of those will get you there. And we have a
Okay.
store and an apothecary and a clinic. The store is called herbalfirstaidgear.com. So
Okay.
herbalfirstaidgear.com. And if you go to the store, you'll have a link to the school. And if you go to the school, you have a link to the store and so forth. And
Perfect.
we have lots and lots of very cool formulas. We have herbal first aid kits. We have regular first aid kits with herbs
Oh,
in them.
cool.
We have all kinds of backpack, and I have a whole backpackers apothecary where I do special things that nobody else do. I freeze dry final formulas so that they're literally like they take up a tenth of the weight and the size for being able to transport. I do lactocarium
Wow.
resin. I do all kinds of stuff that a lot of people don't. You can't even get anywhere else. So herbalfirstaidgear.com is where you get that.
So cool. So even if we don't know anything about how to make it, we can get the things we need.
Yeah, I will and can make you anything, and I have literally probably I don't know 120 or more formulas, and of course we have simples, probably 300 different simples, and then we have all kinds of backpack kits and backpacks and
Fascinating.
first aid kits and all kinds of stuff like that. We always
I'm
have
gonna
something
look it up.
different.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
look it up. And then on like just on social media, they just look for Sam Coffman.
yeah, you can just Google me, find me on Sam Coffman. I have it's Herbal Medic Sam on
Okay.
Instagram, Herbal Medic Sam, and then we
Herbal
have
Medic
a
Sam.
huge group on Facebook that's I never remember the name of it, but it's basically if you look up Herbal Medics, it's like the Herbal
Okay.
Medics community and self sustainability or something like that. But it's basically the Herbal Medics community online on Facebook that's big and very active, incredibly active. I don't pop in there a lot, other than to put in postings about what our latest or what our new classes are coming out, or my latest blog or my latest podcast or whatever may be going on. I'm on YouTube. But I haven't updated in a long time. But I've got a lot of stuff on there. I've got a lot of plant walks on there. It's under
And
the
is that
human path.
Sam Kaufman or Herbal
No, it's
Medic?
the human path. Although if you
The
if
human
you
path.
you'd probably get there with either of those, but the human path, the original, that's the original YouTube. And yeah, I've
Okay.
got tons of plant walks there. My book, obviously, Herbal Medic, is under
Mhm.
Story Publishing and is on Amazon. It's got, it's one of their top three bestsellers. And then, as you mentioned earlier, and showed the cover to it, Survival Gardening, as well as my
Yes.
latest. I have a third one coming out in about a year with them. That's all about water, everything you can imagine about water in post disaster and
Hmm.
remote environments. I'm writing a fiction series. I have the first book almost done and ready to go to the editor. And
Wow.
that's going to
Do you
be,
take time to eat?
yeah, eating. Sleep? I don't know.
We know you don't need sleep. We know that.
We gotta
Well,
figure that
Sam,
out, yeah. Yeah,
thank you so much for taking the time today to talk. And I tell you what, I know I've already asked you this, so I already know the answer. But if you will have time to come back on next week, I have even more questions for you. So we'll talk again
sure.
next week if that's good for you.
Absolutely, yeah, and maybe any specific
Perfect.
questions you have about herbs or anything like that, of course, we could get into that then.
Perfect. Great. Thanks so much, Sam.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening today, friends. I hope that you can join Sam and I again next week. I'm actually recording this little outro after recording the next episode with Sam. And I can tell you right now, you do not want to miss next week's. If you thought this week was interesting, next week is interesting, plus hands on, extremely useful information of very simple ways to include herbs for very specific purposes in your and your family's life. So don't miss next week when Sam is back with us. And for now, thanks for listening, friends. Remember, it is easy to forget how blessed we are to live this life. So enjoy the simple, everyday efforts. It's not always easy, but it's a very good life.